friends are since.
Many years ago, I started out making electronic music with the discovery of both LSDJ and KGB, which are applications on the Game Boy, which I used in some kind of vain attempt to make my otherwise incredibly pedestrian acoustic guitar songs just that wee bit more interesting. Since those days, I've had something of an enduring fondness for so-called chiptune synthesizers, and Twisted Electrons, more than any other manufacturer, I think, are arguably the real kings of that particular genre. They make a whole bunch of amazing inventive devices based on and bringing out the possibilities of old games consoles like the Sega Mega Drive, which has the Mega FM synthesizer, and also the Therapsid, which is based on the legendary Commodore 64 SID chip. I have bought, owned, and loved many of these personally. A few months ago, I picked up one of Twisted Electrons' more relatively recent synthesizers called Blast Beats, which is a 10-voice groovebox which utilises a vintage Yamaha FM chip for the sounds. Now, despite being something of admittedly a relative FM noob, over the past couple of years I've really come to appreciate how glitchy and beautiful that particular approach to synthesis can be when used, correctly, or I guess perhaps more accurately, incorrectly. And specifically, I really love bits of gear like the Yamaha TQ5, Akemi's Taiko, etc. I've done a video or two on this before, and as somebody who's kind of, swimming in the shallow waters of IDM, or swimming in the IDM's shallow waters, I don't know if that makes any sense, the prospect of a dedicated standalone percussion-based glitch machine was just too tantalising not to take a chance on. As a device, Blast Beats is a really nice bit of kit with a solid metal chassis and these lovely clicky buttons. At its core, it's kind of an AOA or 303 or 606 style sequencer cum synthesizer, which has got 6 drum tracks and 4 monophonic melodic style synth tracks, which can apparently also alternatively be used as 2 stereo synth tracks. Though to be honest, I haven't bothered doing that myself. You can route each individual track to and between 4 different 1/4-inch jack outputs, which is great for processing the sound separately. There is both a MIDI input and output on full-sized DIN jacks, and this means that you can either use Blast Beats as a standalone groovebox style device, you can sequence it over MIDI as a kind of multi-timbrel, I guess, FM synthesizer, and similarly, the internal sequencer can also spit out MIDI data, so you can use this ostensibly to control other bits of gear if you wanted to as well. To me though, it seems like the main purpose of this device is really as a standalone box, which you would use to create these tweakable, noisy patterns of FM goodness. To that end, you can save various different kits or presets, as well as songs which have got these chainable patterns, and I think they max out at something like 16 patterns of 64 steps each, so it is a decent amount. On top of that, you can also adjust per step settings such as the probability of a trigger, you can control the overall swing of a track, apply vibrato and fader automation, and there are a few different live effects as well, like stutter and pitch bend. All in all, this feels like quite a capable Roland-style chiptune box. The real strength of Blast Beats though, or at least the thing that drew me, and I suspect many others, into it in the first place, was that it makes percussive FM synthesis far more accessible, breaking it out the various parameters into a selection of almost 60 different faders. I think it's something like 56. FM is often considered to be notoriously difficult to program and get your head around, and so this approach, in theory at least, makes a huge difference to that. I mean, who doesn't love fucking about with lots of different parameters after all? Now, whilst this instrument is great in many ways, I do have to say that as somebody who understood that this is a very niche product, somebody that loves glitchy, noisy instrumentation, and somebody who specifically got the Blast Beats with that in mind, it hasn't quite found a place in my studio or my workflow, and I want to explain why. One of the main reasons that I bought one of these was the prospect of being able to quickly program these dirty, glitchy, rhythmical patterns, which I could then play about with and adjust in real time to accompany other arrangements. I wasn't, especially interested in programming full songs or anything else, even though that is technically possible. The real magic for me was in the accessibility of those FM chips and the noisy goodness that I could then eke out of them. And unfortunately, as much as I really wanted to love this thing, it just never happened. One of the big challenges of an FM synthesizer like this, at least in my limited understanding anyway, is that the operators and whatever else are inextricably linked, and with the blast beats in particular, may be linked in ways that you don't appreciate or even realise. So for example, if you change elements of something like the hi-hat or cymbal, then that can ostensibly also influence the snare sound. And the variation in both volume and timbre there means that getting consistently decent sounds I have found to be incredibly difficult. Whilst I was fully prepared to, spend my time tweaking and adjusting things, I also ended up just having to compensate a lot of the time for changes that I'd made elsewhere, and overall I was pretty underwhelmed. Now, I don't want to talk Twisted Electrons down here, that isn't the point of this video. I do appreciate the Blast Beats is not a bog standard groovebox or drum machine. It is a very niche product, as I've already said. And I'm sure that there are lots of people out there that, will really love it, and do really love it. I know you're out there because I read Electronauts and all that kind of thing, but as somebody who is a self-confessed lover of chip music, and who appreciates some, all the weird and wonderful devices like this, I have to say that it feels like this one just missed the mark somehow, perhaps by trying to be a bit too many things at once. If this was just a sound module that you could control with an external sequencer, and the added, resources that went into developing the sequencer part and everything else were put towards just making sure the sounds were really strong and solid and consistent, then I might have liked it a bit better, but unfortunately. I got this specifically for the rhythmical percussive elements, and I feel like they are a bit disappointing. The synthesizers do sound cool, the melodic parts are quite sweet and they have lots of potential, but I think that this is much better realised, or at least that element of things is much better realised in a different package, such as Twisted Electrons Mega FM Synth, for example. Something which I like a lot. Whatever the reasoning may be, the Blast Beats ultimately is not for me. And by the time that you've seen this, I suspect I will, sadly, probably have sold it on. Whilst, something like Akemi's Taiko and Akemi's Castle both require a modular system to be usable, for me they've proven to be much more rewarding for the kind of percussive sound that I'm after, as has the Mega FM for more synthy sounds. So those are what I will be sticking with, and probably what I would recommend to other folk as well. If Blast Beats only cost a few £100, then this would all be kind of academic, and I would frankly accept it for what it is, but at about 500 plus Great British pounds, then it really has to hit the spot in order for me to justify the cost, and sadly, it just doesn't really. I wish it did, but I'm curious to see if Twisted Electrons bring out a successor to Blast Beats. This is something they've done in the past with things like the Therapsid, where the OG version was quite buggy. I've got one here somewhere actually. I only had one SID chip in there, and overall it was a cool idea, but there were, flaws in the final execution, but now they've got a Mark III and it's excellent. And I could see that maybe being the case in future with Blast Beats, so who knows. With all of that said, if you do have a blast beats and you love it, I would genuinely really like to hear what you've done with it. One of the big reasons that I made this video in the first place was to share my experience, because there aren't a huge amount of videos out there on blast beats. And so if you're interested in getting one and curious about what it's like to use and practice, hopefully this has given you at least another kind of perspective to think about. As ever, I've shared a whole bunch of recordings from not just this video, but all of the other videos that I record and put together onto Patreon. And you can find the link below to sign up and download all of that stuff if you fancy, doing that kind of thing. For now though, tatty bye.